Hey guys, welcome to tonight's channel. The story you're about to hear isn't an ancient legend, but a real mystery passed down through generations about the knights who were frozen in the heart of winter, where time stopped, and their souls still wander beneath the cold snow. Before we begin this journey, do me a small favor. If you love mysterious stories, hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, so you won't miss the next nights of storytelling. I really want to know, where are you listening to this story from? In bed, in a dark room, or when the night has already covered the city? And what time is it now, midnight, or just the edge of twilight? Whatever the hour, dim the lights, put down your phone, loosen your body, take a slow, deep breath. Let your mind drift with the sound of the winter wind. Because once the story begins, this chill you feel isn't imagination, it's the sign that they've returned. There's a place that maps don't show, whispered only in winter taverns, the White Valley. They say that every 7 winters, when the northern wind returns and the earth freezes until it cracks, the snow buries that place again. Not by chance, not by nature, but because something beneath the ground wants to hide itself. The elders of the village say that when they were young, they once saw metal glinting through a blizzard, like the reflection from armor moving under the ice. No human voices, only the sound of iron scraping iron, and distant hoofbeats echoing through the wind. Whenever that happened, the villagers would bolt their doors, douse their fires, and pray in silence, because they believed that was the night the knights returned. Not to save anyone, but to find what they had lost in their final battle. Long ago, this valley was the camp of a great army. They were called the Knights of the Frozen Oath, sent north by the Holy Temple during the Crusades. It was said they wore silver armor, their swords shining like moonlight, and they swore never to return until the ice melted and evil was erased. But the ice never melted, and they never came back. Generations passed, leaving only stories and the sound of wind whistling through the cliffs like clashing metal. Some dared to travel there, carrying compasses and torches, saying that in the center of the valley the ground was so cold the compass needle stopped moving. The wind there wasn't normal, it didn't blow, it hissed, carrying the breath of someone speaking. Each gust was a word, meaningless at first, but the longer one stayed, the clearer it became. We are not done. Beneath the thick snow, they found round stones that looked like grave markers, but with no names. Each had a shallow imprint of a hand, as if someone had tried to climb out from below, then been pulled back down. Strangest of all, at the valley's heart, there was a deep crack stretching for dozens of meters, always exhaling cold air even in midsummer. The villagers called it the breath of ice. No one dared go near, except an old hunter named Arvin. He once claimed he heard horses breathing at night, and saw hoofprints in the frozen ground, only 4, as if from a single horse, a single rider. When asked what he saw, he only said, "They're still there, just not awake yet." After that, Arvin disappeared. The valley's cold doesn't only touch the skin, it seeps into memory. Some say that if you go there alone and listen long enough, you'll hear faint prayers, soft steel clashing, and the steady breath of hundreds waiting for command. No one knows what they wait for, maybe a winter cold enough, or the call of the one who betrayed them. Either way, the snow returns every 7 years, to the exact day and hour. That night, the moon vanishes completely, the wind shifts, and hoofbeats echo once more beneath the earth. Someone once recorded the sound, but when played back, it was only a heartbeat, as if the listener was being pulled under. Priests from afar tried to bless the place, but by morning their crosses were covered in thick frost. People whispered that the ice didn't want to be banished because it wasn't evil. It was guarding something. Every century, a few curious souls try to dig it up, searching for truth. None return before winter ends. Only one journal was ever found, unfinished, its final line scrawled in haste. I saw their eyes open. Since then, the valley has been abandoned. Even the nomads avoid its path. The map of the region is crossed out, the road forgotten. But whenever the northern wind blows, carrying the scent of metal and a cold that cuts to the bone, the elders still say, "Don't look out the window. And if you see silver light in the snow, don't think it's the moon. Because it might be the armor of the knights, still searching for their souls lost forever in a winter that never ended." And then, you realize in the wind whistling past your window, There's a rhythm 3 beats, then silence, then 3 more. Like the sound of hooves, coming from far away, but growing closer. The first winter wind swept through a moonless night. Frost covered the rooftops, and cold air slipped through the cracks of every door, seeping into each room like invisible fingers. The villagers knew when that wind came from the north, straight from the White Valley. It wasn't just the sign that winter had begun, but a reminder that old souls were about to wake. At first, it was only the sound of wind whistling through the dry pines. But then, within that wind, another sound emerged, low and steady, like the heartbeat of something enormous beneath the ground. A child awoke, listening. From afar, in the silence of the night, came a sound like hoofbeats. 1, 2, then more echoing rhythmically, near and far, blending with the faint clash of metal against metal. His mother pulled him close and whispered, "Don't listen, child. They're passing through." No one asked who they were. Everyone knew. The elders had heard it all their lives, and each time the winter grew longer, colder. Some said it was an echo from the past, the nights long dead, riding beneath the ice, trying to find their way home. But one man swore that when he stood near the frozen river, he felt the ground tremble, and the hoofbeats weren't coming from far away, but from right beneath his feet. That night, the blacksmith, Caelan, heard it clearer than anyone. He lived at the edge of the village, near the path to the valley. When the first northern wind blew, he was still awake, fixing an axe by the fire. The crackling flames mixed with the rhythm of his hammer until another sound answered back, faint and distant, like someone striking iron in reply. He froze, listening. Only wind. Then, from deep below, came a grinding noise, the synchronized rhythm of hundreds of hooves hitting the ground, iron against iron, heavy and drawn out. Caelan stepped outside. The wind hit his face like breaking ice. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but frost blanketed the ground white. He heard it clearly, each beat growing closer. It wasn't an illusion. It wasn't the wind. It was the march of an army moving beneath the frozen earth. He swore he saw the snow shift, as if something massive slid below it, dragging chains and armor along. Caelan said he wanted to shout for help, but his throat froze, no sound came out. Only when the noise stopped suddenly did he stumble back, collapsing on his porch, heart pounding wildly. That night, no one in the village slept. From house to house, candles were lit, doors were bolted, and everyone listened. The hoofbeats returned 3 times. Each time, clear and even, stopping in the same direction toward the mouth of the valley. When dawn approached, a heavy mist covered the ground, white and thick like a burial shroud. And within it, people saw long tracks across the frost like the trail of wagon wheels. Though no wheels were there, the younger villagers said they didn't believe. 5 of them took lanterns and went to the valley entrance. They came back at sunrise, pale-faced, lips blue, eyes wide and empty. They couldn't speak, only repeated one sentence over and over. "Someone is looking up from beneath the ice." When others followed them there, nothing remained, only wind and the soft drip of melting ice. The villagers brought back a dull shard of frozen crystal. Inside it, something faintly gleamed. They placed it near the fire, and as the ice melted, a small silver fragment appeared. A piece of armor etched with a 6-pointed star. No one had ever seen such craftsmanship, and strangely, it was colder than ice itself, even after an hour by the flames. The village priest took it, intending to bring it to the chapel. But the moment he touched it, his hand blistered, burned by cold. He dropped it and left it there. That night, the hoofbeats returned, echoing across rooftops, through the streets, as if searching for something lost. A pregnant woman said she heard a man whisper outside her window, a voice speaking an ancient tongue, soft but clear, just 3 words: "Give it back to us." The next morning, hoofprints were found in the snow outside her house. 4 perfect marks, all facing the door. No one dared to speak of it again. The villagers agreed. When the hoofbeats returned, everyone would stay silent. No fires, no windows open. Because they believed that if you looked upon the glow of their armor, you'd see your own reflection in the ice, and if you didn't look away in time, that gaze would pull your soul beneath, replacing one of the knights still sleeping below. Every 7 years it happens again, and no one knows why. only that the first wind of winter doesn't just carry the chill of the season, it carries the breath of the restless. And when night falls, if you ever hear the sound of metal beneath the ground, remember what the villagers said. Don't run, don't look. They don't come to kill. They come to remember. But perhaps the most terrifying thing isn't that they're beneath the ice. It's that every time the hoofbeats stop, someone in the village disappears, quietly, without a trace. No screams, no struggle. Only small footprints leading to the frozen river and stopping there, as if that person had just stepped into winter's dream. The elders of the village say that before the valley was buried in snow, it was once a battlefield. Not a war between two kingdoms, but between mankind and what they called the will of winter. From the old records left behind in the chapel, people found the name of an army once stationed there, the Order of the Frozen Cross. They were sent by the church on a journey no one dared name, only knowing that it was a mission with no end. They marched north to where ice never melts and the sun never rises. They carried the holy banners, believing they were chosen by God to destroy everything deemed heretical. But it was said that on the final night of that crusade, they themselves were the ones condemned. Legend has it, after 40 days crossing the frozen wilderness, they reached an abandoned village, everything covered in frost. No people, no signs of life. Only a ruined old church standing alone amid the snow. They made camp around it, believing this was where they would find the answer to their holy mission. But that night, the sky was starless, moonless, and the wind stopped blowing. A strange silence fell. In that stillness, their commander, Sir Roderick, stepped into the church. It said he carried a silver sword, the last light left in the ice. Inside, there was no altar, only a mirror of frost as tall as a man. On its surface was carved an ancient phrase, written in a tongue long forbidden: "Seek not God in the ice, for the ice is where he sleeps." The commander laughed. He thought it was the work of heretics, and drew his sword to strike. But when the blade touched the mirror, it wasn't the ring of metal that answered, it was wind. A violent gust screamed through, the ice shattered, and from it poured a cold so deep it felt alive. The entire army awoke to a storm like no other. The sky turned black, the snow so thick they couldn't see their own hands. Every torch went out, every horse panicked, and amidst the chaos they heard laughter not human, but the wind itself, howling with the voice of an angry god. The knights stumbled outside, trying to regroup, but one by one they fell. Their skin froze mid-breath. Their blood turned to ice within their veins. Only Roderick stood against the storm, shouting, "We are God's men. He cannot punish me." But instead of an answer, a deep voice echoed across the valley. "You have brought fire to where I sleep. Now you shall guard me until the end of time." Then the storm swallowed them all. When morning came, the sun rose over a world reborn. Ice covered everything. And at the centre stood figures frozen mid-kneel, heads bowed, hands resting on their swords. They were sealed where they stood, eyes open, as if witnessing something no mortal should ever see. Passing nomads claimed that if you listened closely to the wind, you could hear their whispers, "Forgive us." But no one knew whom they were pleading to God, or the god of ice who had imprisoned them. From the fragments of text that survived, it's known that Roderick and his men once received a prophecy. He who brings flame to the land of snow shall find immortality, but never warmth again. They thought it was a blessing, not a curse. Ever since, every 7 winters, when the first snow falls, the valley freezes deeper, as though the hand of that god is strengthening the seal. Some say that deep within the ice, Sir Roderick still lives not in the way of men, but as the consciousness of one who cannot die. They say if you reach the heart of the valley and listen carefully, you'll hear a slow, steady breathing, the breath of the cursed commander, guarding the vow he betrayed. In an old monastery nearby, there's a trembling note written by a young monk. They broke the oath. They did not wait for the blessing. They marched before God had spoken. And when they called his name in the storm, it was not light that answered. Beneath it, melted candle wax and a single line, scratched out violently. "Do not pray on the night of the northern wind." The people believed the god of ice they offended wasn't a demon, but an ancient balance, a guardian between life and death. When they brought the fire of faith into his domain, they shattered that order. To restore it, he made them part of the frost itself, neither alive nor dead, but bound to guard what they once defied. Every winter, when hoofbeats echo beneath the ground, they say it's Roderick and his knights moving in their sleep patrolling the border between worlds. Children born in that season are told, if you hear hooves in the wind, don't look outside. If they see you, they'll think you were chosen to carry their oath. And when someone vanishes in the cold, no one searches. They only whisper, another knight has been chosen. Perhaps that's how the curse stays asleep. Yet on certain nights, in the heart of a blizzard, travellers have seen the silhouette of a rider in silver armour crossing the ridge, his blade flashing like a shard of lightning. And in that fleeting moment, they swear they heard a voice carried by the wind. We are not dead. We are only waiting for the winter cold enough to return. That winter came earlier than usual. Snow fell so thick that the mountain paths vanished overnight. People said the ice god was angry again. But to Arik, an old woodcutter living alone on the mountainside, snow was just a familiar part of life. That morning, he woke early, planning to chop some wood before the storm hit. As he walked through the pine forest where the wind howled day and night, he noticed something strange on the ground. The snow there wasn't even it, bulged upward, forming a mound, and beneath it, a faint silver light shimmered. He stepped closer, using his axe to brush away the snow. At first, it was just a block of clear ice, but the more he cleared, the more he saw the shape inside. A person. Not an ordinary one. Beneath the ice stood a figure upright, proud, encased in full armour, one hand gripping the hilt of a sword, head slightly bowed as if awaiting a command. The face perfect to the point of fear, eyes wide open, pale blue, still glimmering inside the frozen layer as though alive. Arik staggered back, his heart pounding. He'd heard the tales of knights sealed by the ice god, but he never believed them. Now, standing before that frozen figure, he understood why people called it a curse, not a legend. He touched the ice. It was so cold it burned. Yet somehow, he felt something faint beneath it, a slow pulse. No, not an illusion. The ice trembled softly, like the breath of someone asleep. Arik jerked his hand back, falling into the snow. As he opened his eyes, the wind rose suddenly, cutting through the forest like blades. Within that wind came a sound, the faint, unmistakable ring of metal against metal, as if someone was adjusting their sword in its sheath. He looked around. The forest was empty, but the sound didn't stop. It came from the ice. Arik lit his torch and leaned closer. On the chest of the frozen knight was a strange symbol, a cross twisted into a snowflake. Beneath it, lines of ancient script he couldn't read. But one word stood out clearly among the carvings. Roderick. The name he'd heard before. In the priest's stories, the commander who betrayed his oath. Arik felt a chill crawl up his spine, though the torch still burned. He wanted to leave, but when he turned around, he realized the snow beneath his feet had turned to ice. There were no footprints. No breath but his own ragged one. Then a sharp crack. From within the ice, a thin fracture appeared, running from the shoulder down across the chest. A faint blue light glowed through it, flickering like ghostly fire. Arik stepped back, trembling, unable to look away. The light moved, flowing like glowing veins beneath the ice, spreading across the knight's body. Arik let out a gasp, dropped the torch, and ran. When he looked back, the light was gone. The ice stood still again, silent and cold. He ran all night, stumbling home in terror. By dawn, the village heard him pounding on the chapel doors, screaming that he'd seen the man in the ice. The old priest came, trying to calm him. But when he heard the name Roderick, his eyes darkened. The next morning, he and a few young men followed Arik back to the spot. But when they arrived, the ice was gone. Only a wide depression in the ground remained, surrounded by shattered shards, the edges scorched black as if they had touched fire. Arik swore he wasn't mad, that he'd heard the night breathing. The priest only whispered, "If it was truly him, then this winter will not end." That night, the first blizzard struck. Winds tore open the chapel doors. The cross atop the steeple snapped and fell into the snow. Arik lay bedridden, his body freezing even beside the flames. He kept muttering. "He looked at me. He knows I spoke his name." When the storm passed, villagers found a small droplet-shaped shard of ice on the table beside his bed, perfectly clear, and inside it, a faint trace of moving blue light. No one dared touch it. As for Arik, he vanished the next night. His window left open, snow piled thick on the bed, but there were no footprints leaving the room. After that, every winter, a new figure of ice appeared on the mountainside shaped like a man, always in a different place, but the eyes within the ice were always the same, open, pale, and watching those who disturbed the silence of the snow. The villagers whispered that these weren't the knights, they were the ones who had seen him, now trapped within the ice, guarding Sir Roderick's eternal oath. And on nights of dim moonlight, when the wind howls through the forest, people still hear a voice whispering, "You spoke my name, so I remember your face." The long winter finally surrendered to the first light of spring. Snow on the mountain peaks melted slowly, each droplet falling from pine branches to the ground, glinting in the pale sunlight like metal. The entire valley seemed to wake from a long dream. But on the mountainside where Arik once stood, where he had found that human-shaped block of ice, no one knew that the sun was awakening something mankind was never meant to touch. When the first rays of sunlight broke through the thick mist and struck the last remaining block of ice in the forest, a small sound echoed. Crack, then another. A thin fracture crept from the shoulder down to the chest of the frozen figure. At first, it was no more than a silver thread glinting under the light. But as the sun climbed higher, its weak warmth spread, and the crack widened slowly, like a vein coming alive. Inside the ice, a faint blue light flickered, refracting through the frozen layers. The first to discover it was a young hunter named Darren. He had never believed Arik's story, dismissing it as the rambling of a frail old man. But when he saw that fracture, he felt something different. Kneeling down, he touched the ice. Instantly, his skin burned, blistering not from the cold, but from something inside the ice burning outward. Darren recoiled, eyes fixed on the widening crack. Within, he could see the knight's hand rigid as steel, sinewed, gripping tightly to a rusted sword. But what froze him in place was the way that hand seemed to move. Just slightly, impossibly slow but real. The cracking grew louder, sharper, deeper. Shards of ice fell, clinking against each other. The sunlight grew stronger, scattering across the surface, making the entire block glow as if alive. And then, in one fleeting instant, Darren swore he saw the eyes behind the ice shift. No longer the dead blue Arik had described, but the gaze of someone awakening from centuries of sleep. Darren ran or tried to. He slipped down the slope, tumbling through snow. When he looked back, the ice was gone. In its place were small streams of melted water, and at the centre, pressed deep into the wet earth, was a handprint, clear, fresh, as if something had just pulled itself free. When Darren told the story, no one believed him. They said it was the light, the melting ice, his imagination. But the next morning, they found something else. The boulder where the ice once stood had split in two, and wedged in the crack was a rusted sword. The hilt bore ancient carvings, the same symbol found on old valley maps, the emblem of the Oath of Ice. The old priest recognized it immediately. He said nothing, only ordered the villagers not to touch it. Yet the more they tried to ignore it, the more they heard it. First came the sound of wind, then the faint ring of metal, and finally whispers. Some claimed to hear prayers, others, curses. When night fell, the sword began to glow faintly, not with firelight, but with cold light, breathing through the mist. The children said they saw a shadowed figure standing on the mountainside, hand on the sword, eyes dimly shining. The adults said it was just moonlight, but none dared to go and see. By the third day, the crack in the boulder had widened, and from deep within the earth came the sounds of metal clashing, armor scraping, and the rhythmic pounding of hooves. On the fourth day, a frozen horse was found by the stream, its body encased in frost, eyes open wide, one foreleg raised as if still trying to run, but there were no tracks around it. It hadn't come from anywhere it had appeared, as if born from the ice itself. The priest understood what it meant. He wrote in his journal, "When the crack opens, the seal weakens. The sun does not bring life here, it awakens what was buried." That night, the valley rang with the echo of metal, a long, resonant sound that carried through the wind. People said it was the sword, calling back the souls once trapped in ice. A blind woman swore she heard prayers in the wind, in a language no one remembered. But within the prayer, one sentence was clear: "We are not done." The next morning, the sword was gone. Some said it was stolen, but there were no footprints, no drag marks. The stone had frozen over again, and in its centre was a single handprint, not human, but far larger. The priest searched his scriptures in desperation, speaking of the return of the frost night, when the oath of betrayal would awaken with the breath of spring. He said, winter's end was not a release, only a pause, a gathering of strength for the souls preparing to rise again. The villagers trembled, but soon fell silent. For even as spring warmed the air, they could still hear it, the sound of hooves beneath the earth, steady and slow, like the heartbeat of something waiting. Some swore they saw snow rising upward, spiraling from the ground before vanishing into the air. Since then, no one has dared to climb that slope. They call it now the place of the frozen hand. And though spring blooms across the land, that ground remains sealed in ice all year. Those who pass nearby feel a chill run down their spine as if watched from beneath the earth, by something patient and silent, waiting for the day the crack opens again, so that hand can once more take up the sword and finish what winter left undone. They say that after the sword was found and then disappeared, the village fell into a strange stillness. Not the peace of spring, but a silence so heavy it made people hold their breath. The wind stopped blowing, birds stopped singing, and every night the moon was swallowed by mist. Then, one morning, a shepherd boy named Aaron found something lying by the stream, an old sword hilt, rusted and worn, but covered in strange symbols. They weren't human letters, nor ancient runes, nor marks of the church. Each line was deep and sharp, as if carved by hand rather than chisel. Under the sunlight they didn't reflect light, they absorbed it. The hilt seemed to drink the day itself. Aaron brought it back to the village, proudly showing everyone. But when the priest saw it, his face drained of colour. He shouted at the boy to drop it. The hilt hit the floor with a metallic clang, yet the sound didn't end. It stretched on, cold and deep, like someone plucking an unseen string in the air. Everyone froze. Then, from far away, came another sound, metal answering metal, fainter but clear. The priest crossed himself, whispering a prayer, his hands trembling. He wrapped the hilt in cloth and carried it to the chapel, hiding it in the cellar. But that night, the church bell rang on its own. No one had touched it. There was no wind. 3 tolls, and then silence. When the priest went down to the cellar, the cloth was scorched, and on the stone wall nearby, faint letters had appeared, as if carved by frost itself. "You have spoken my name." The priest collapsed, knowing he had made a terrible mistake. The next morning he gathered the villagers and warned them never to pronounce the symbols on the hilt. But Aaron, curious and stubborn, didn't believe him. He remembered every line, every mark, and that evening, as twilight fell, he snuck back into the chapel. He crept down into the cellar, unwrapped the cloth. The symbols glowed faintly in the dark, pulsing like a heartbeat. He whispered them, one by one, strange sounds, unlike any language known. By the 3rd symbol, the air began to tremble, dust falling from the ceiling. By the 6th, every candle in the room went out. And when he spoke the final one, the ringing of metal filled the cellar, knocking him to the floor. But the ringing didn't stop. It spread through the walls, through the ground, echoing like the sound of hundreds of swords vibrating at once. Aaron fled, stumbling up the stairs, but when he reached the chapel door, snow was falling in spring. It drifted softly, each flake shimmering silver. In the snow were prints deep, perfect, the marks of armoured boots leading toward the mountain. He screamed, called for help, but no one came. That night, no one in the village slept. Not because of the wind, but because of that sound, the metallic rhythm, steady and endless, like 1,000 warriors forging their blades in the dark. By dawn, the snow had vanished, but in the fields, the grass was scorched black in a perfect circle. At its centre lay a small shard of steel, what was left of the hilt, now broken in 2. Inside the crack, faintly glowing, was a single word etched as if in moonlight: awakening. The priest took the fragment, hiding it deeper beneath the chapel. But every night, he heard the ringing beneath the ground. And not just him, the whole village heard it. Some claimed they saw thin veins of light running through the earth, like roots made of metal. Others swore they heard armor scraping against their windows, though nothing was outside. A young woman lost her mind, saying she dreamed of a vast field of kneeling knights, hands on swords, heads bowed, and at the center, one figure without a face, only blue light spilling from its armor. When she woke, her wrists were bruised, marked with the same symbols from the hilt. After that, she never spoke again. In the priest's final journal, they found a line, "Those symbols were never meant to be read. They are an oath written in the language of the ice god. To speak them is to summon them back." The last thing he wrote, "The swords have stopped ringing. That means they are awake." He disappeared soon after. When the villagers entered the chapel, they found the cellar door wide open. The walls were covered in carvings, the same ancient symbols, intertwined in a circle. At its center, the hilt was gone. Only a deep hollow remained, freezing cold, exhaling mist even in midsummer. Anyone who touched it heard a faint vibration like the heartbeat of something waiting to be drawn. From that day on, no one dared approach the chapel. But at night, if you stand close enough, you can still hear it, a thin, metallic hum echoing through the air, not from metal, but from bone. A reminder that those symbols were never silent, that whoever dares to speak them again will not only awaken the curse, but also the memories of the knights buried beneath the ice, the ones who never forgave themselves. In the old monastery perched on the northern slope of the valley, where the wind howls all year round and the bells have long since fallen silent, there lived an old monk who had been alone for nearly 40 years. People only knew him by the name Father Maren, the one who left the mortal world behind after an event no one dared to mention. He was the last to remain when the other monks departed, and the only one who kept the key to the cellar behind the chapel, a place rumoured to hold ancient manuscripts about the Oath of Ice. That winter, the snow fell so thick, it turned the monastery roof into a single white mass. The wind screamed through the empty halls, carrying strange echoes as if someone far away was whispering prayers. Maren wasn't afraid. Solitude had long been his companion. Every night he lit a single candle and wrote in his journals what he called the testimony of silence. In one trembling entry, he wrote that on the 7th winter night of the cycle, he heard something he would never forget. When the monastery clock struck 12, the wind outside suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, thick, like a blanket pressed over the world. And then, from far off, came a faint sound, hoofbeats, slow, steady, crossing the front gate, moving into the courtyard. The faint clatter of armor, the heavy breath of a beast so clear he thought someone was truly out there. Maren rushed to the window, lifted his lamp, and peered into the yard. Nothing. The snow was untouched, smooth and perfect. But the hoofbeats continued. They echoed down the hallway, past the chapel door, slow, hollow, like a procession of the unseen. He clutched the window frame, heart pounding, sweat running cold down his neck. Then came the sound of metal, the whisper of a blade being drawn. The chapel door trembled slightly, and the candle on the altar flickered, though there was no wind. In the faint light, Maren saw a shadow on the wall, tall, thin, wearing a helm and armor, a sword in hand, head bowed. When he blinked, it was gone, but the hoofbeats went on. He wrote that he couldn't move, only listen. The sound circled the monastery 3 times, then stopped right beneath his window, and then total silence. But just when he thought it was over, there came a soft knock at his door 3 times, even and calm. When he opened it, no one was there, only a long wet streak on the stone floor, freezing solid moments later. He touched it. It burned with cold, and the smell iron, old and sharp. The smell of ancient blood. From that night, Maren never slept again. Each night, he heard the horses passing, sometimes one, sometimes many. Some nights he heard voices speaking in an ancient tongue, deep and rhythmic like a chant. He began recording everything, every sound, every gust of wind. Once, he dared to step outside when the noise returned, carrying a lamp through the storm. The wind cut his face, snow stung his eyes, yet the hoofbeats sounded close, just a few paces away. He raised his light, and in the dim glow saw white mist moving through the air, twisting into the shape of riders. Whenever the light touched them, they dissolved like smoke, then reappeared elsewhere. Suddenly, one of the horses screamed. a sound like ice cracking in the heart of the mountain. Marin stumbled back, the lamp went out, and darkness swallowed him whole. When he awoke, he was back in his chamber, shaking, the window wide open. Outside, written across the snow in blackened burn marks, were the words, "We still stand guard." After that, the old monk no longer prayed at the altar. He began speaking to someone no one else could see. He said they did not come to harm, but to remind that they were once servants of God, betrayed by the very faith they served. "Whenever the wind stops," he wrote, "it means they are passing by, and if you hear horses but see no tracks, kneel for you, stand on their road." Years later, when Marin died, they found his old journal hidden in the wall. The last page, shaky and blurred with water, read, "Tonight, they stopped at my door. Someone knocked and called my name, but I am not afraid, for I have heard the sound of my own armor." No one ever truly understood what he meant. But when they buried him on the mountain slope, the snow suddenly stopped falling, and in the wind, the echo of hoofbeats rang 3 times, fading slowly into silence. Later, the caretakers of the monastery claimed that every 7th winter, on a night heavy with snow, the sound of horses still circles the old chapel. No figures, no tracks. Only metal against metal, and sometimes a low voice whispering through the cold. Marin heard us, do you? In 1893, when the world still believed that everything could be explained by science, a group of Northern European scholars received word of a human-shaped block of ice discovered in the mountains near the ancient border of the White Valley. They were from the Royal Institute of Archaeology men, who claimed to resurrect the past through reason, led by Dr. Havel. The group of 7 set out, carrying thermometers, gas lamps, and even Bibles. Just in case, they said, they encountered something reason could not define. When they arrived, they found the block standing still on the mountainside over 2 meters tall, transparent, shimmering in the moonlight. Inside was the figure of a man clad in silver armor, hand gripping a sword hilt, eyes wide open. One archaeologist exclaimed it was a rare case of natural preservation, but Havel said coldly, "No, this is nature's experiment on the human soul." They lowered the ice with chains, hauled it onto a sled, and transported it back to their city laboratory. Along the way, the air was so cold the horses trembled beneath their cloth masks. The driver swore he heard something from within the crate, not the sound of cracking ice, but metal brushing against metal. No one believed him. When they placed the block inside the Institute's exhibit hall, the furnace had been burning for 2 days, raising the temperature to 27 degrees. Yet the ice did not melt. When they placed a thermometer near it, the needle plummeted uncontrollably, dropped to -20 within seconds, and snapped. Havel wrote in his journal, "We stand before a physical paradox. The ice does not react to heat yet, it breathes." That night, he ordered the experiment to begin. They shone bright lamps upon the block, measured reflections, took photographs on silver plates, even attempted to extract a sample with a steel blade. The moment the tip touched the surface, a metallic resonance rang through the room. Not like ice cracking, but like a sword being drawn from its sheath. Everyone froze. The fire in the furnace suddenly dimmed. The flames turned blue, and a wave of cold swept through the room. One of the younger researchers cried out, watching his breath turn to frost. Havel tried to remain calm, but he could feel it, the heat being drained from the air. "It isn't physics," he wrote. "It feels as though something inside is swallowing the warmth." Then, the gas lamps flickered, and one of the glass shields shattered. Another scholar screamed, claiming he saw the statue's eyes move. Havel shouted it was a hallucination, but when he turned, he saw it too. The eyes within the ice reflecting the lamplight not still, but trembling slightly, as if someone inside was looking back. Then came a faint crack. Havel ordered the lamps off, the fire extinguished, the experiment terminated, but it was already too late. The temperature dropped so sharply the windows froze solid, and from within the ice they heard a sound, deep, heavy, like a voice speaking an ancient tongue. They could not understand the words, but it carried rhythm, the cadence of an oath. One of the young men collapsed, blood streaming from his nose, eyes wide in terror. When they pulled him away, strange marks had appeared on his wrist, fine cuts, forming symbols identical to those once recorded on the sword hilt found in old church archives. Havel ordered the ice sealed and moved to the sub-cellar, but by morning it was gone. The iron door was locked from the inside, yet on the frosted floor were 7 sets of footprints, each facing a different direction. Havel vanished along with his journal. Only a torn half-page remained, reading, "Heat is not lost, it is taken." The thing inside the ice breathed. The institute closed soon after, citing a laboratory accident that left 4 dead and 3 missing. The city fell silent about the incident. But that winter, temperatures across the region plummeted. The ice stayed until April. People whispered of hearing hoofbeats at night coming from the direction of the institute. A new security guard later claimed that whenever he passed the storage cellar, he heard the faint sound of metal, as though someone were forging swords in the dark. They laughed at him, until the day the northern wall of the cellar cracked open. Behind the bricks was an empty cavity filled with opaque ice, and inside, the shape of something human. When they tried to seal it, the temperature fell so rapidly the steel beams shrank. A gas lamp burst, and in the instant the light went out, someone heard a whisper close to their ear. "You called me with fire. Now I answer with ice." The cellar was sealed forever, the records burned. But those who still worked at the institute swore that every year, on the last night of winter, frost would form on the inside of the windows, and at their center, a handprint, so cold the glass would crack. On the old laboratory table, someone had carved the unfinished line Havel left behind. "Ice does not sleep. It only waits for the cold to dream again." When the incident at the Institute of Archaeology was sealed away, people thought it was over. But one man refused to accept that. His name was Wilhelm Krauss, a painter and observer hired to document the remaining artifacts before they were destroyed. He was granted permission to stay in the laboratory for one night, to complete the final sketch of the ice block, the last remnant after the Institute's closure. There was no electric light anymore, only a small fire burning in the furnace, its glow flickering through the thick ice, bathing the room in dim orange light. Krauss sat silently before the block, his trembling hand moving the pencil, tracing every line of the knight's face inside. The face was unnervingly perfect, not like a corpse frozen in death, but like a man deep in sleep. He drew every detail, the corner of the mouth, the closed lids, the frost-covered brows. But as he leaned closer, the fire suddenly wavered, the light bent, and for an instant he saw the knight's lips move. Just barely a faint quiver, like a breath being held. Krauss froze, his heart pounding. He stared, convinced it was a trick of the firelight. But then again, the lips shifted, this time more clearly, a small motion, deliberate, rhythmic, as though the man inside was whispering a prayer or breathing a name. The painter stumbled back, knocking over his chair. His pencil hit the ground, and from within the ice came a low metallic sound, answering the noise as if the smallest disturbance in the room had awakened something. "Impossible," he muttered. "It's just ice, just thermal reflection." But the knight's eyes made him doubt himself. In the firelight, the grey irises within the ice began to glow, not reflecting but shining from within. Krauss stepped closer, lifting his oil lamp to the surface. The knight's face grew clearer, the frost veil thinning. The skin beneath looked faintly flushed, as if blood stirred again, and the lips still moved. He heard a sound, not a voice, but something like wind passing through a hollow pipe, trembling and broken. Krauss pressed his ear to the ice. Through the hiss of the cold, he heard the words, faint and fragmented, repeating again and again, "Mea culpa. Mea culpa. My fault. My fault." He staggered back, his body rigid with cold. It couldn't be an echo, it had breath, it had sorrow. The voice came from within the ice, a confession long trapped. The more he watched, the more the knight's lips moved, then stopped, as though the prayer had been cut short. The fire dimmed suddenly. The heat fled the room. Krauss rushed to the furnace, feeding it wood, but the flames would not rise. The cold radiating from the ice grew stronger, so intense that moisture in the air crystallized into mist. Droplets froze the moment they touched the floor. In that fog, Krauss swore he saw figures moving, men in armor, pale as smoke, forming a circle around the ice. They did not speak. They bowed their heads, hands on sword hilts, and exhaled together. The air vibrated a deep hum that shook the walls, cracked the window glass into white spider veins. Then, silence. Only the knight's face remained, eyes now closed, lips still, peaceful once more. But as Kraus steadied himself and looked again, he realized the face had changed. The contours were different, the jawline shifted, as if the man within had aged, or become someone else entirely. He looked down at his sketch and froze. On the paper, the face he had drawn was no longer the knight's, it was his own. His eyes, wide open, his mouth, moving in the same rhythm as the lips inside the ice. Terrified, he threw the drawing into the fire, but it didn't burn. The paper only blackened at the edges, and from the scorched lines, faint letters emerged, Latin, old and sharp. No one looks upon repentance and remains themselves. Kraus ran outside, screaming for the night watchman. But when they arrived, the room was still. The fire had died. The ice stood motionless. No one believed him. They said he'd gone mad. But the next morning, when they came to clean, something had changed. The face within the ice was no longer the knight's. It was Kraus frozen, lips trembling in silent motion. They found his journal with a final line. I heard the prayer of the condemned. Now it is my turn to learn silence. The Institute of Archaeology was sealed forever after that. No one ever touched the ice again. But every winter, travellers passing near the old road claimed they could hear whispers carried by the wind, mingling with the crackle of their lantern flames. Mea culpa. My fault. And if anyone dared to look through the firelight into the dark reflection of the ice, they would see the face inside was no longer one, but many. Each one belonged to those who once stood too close, believing they were only watching, never realizing they were being watched in return. After the incident with the painter Kraus, the block of ice was sealed away and stored deep within the Institute's underground vault. All records of it were destroyed, but one small object was overlooked, a torn piece of old fabric from the armor inside the ice. It was thought to be nothing more than a corroded steel lining, until someone discovered that within the cloth was hidden a small piece of parchment. It was sealed with green wax, a material used only in the medieval age. When the wax was peeled away, under the dim light appeared trembling black ink, a fragment of a map. It showed mountain lines, rivers, and at the centre, a name written in an extinct ancient tongue, Vallis Juramentum Mortis, the Valley of the Death Oath. Beside it, in a younger hand, someone had added a note, the place where light was betrayed. The map was sent to an old monastery near the border, where Father Benedict, a scholar of forbidden ancient languages, began to study it. It took him 2 weeks to decode the remaining text, and when he finished, he said just one sentence that made everyone uneasy. This place does not exist on the maps of men, but it lies between two worlds. According to his notes, the Valley of the Death Oath was the site where, in the 12th century, a crusader order executed a woman accused of being the Witch of Winter, the one said to have brought frost upon mankind. Yet strangely, no record mentioned her name. Only a single passage in an old manuscript said, "She did not die. She sleeps within the oath of those who killed her." Father Benedict wrote that when he looked closely at the map, the ink lines did not stay still. Under candlelight, the strokes seemed to move slowly, faintly, as if the parchment itself was breathing. At the map's centre, where the words about the valley were inscribed, there was a pale circular stain, not an accident, but the faded imprint of a metallic seal. Within it, a few letters could still be read. Ordo Glacialis, the Order of the Frozen. That name had never appeared in any chronicle, except for a single fragmented note in a medieval priest's diary, mentioning those who swore to keep silent until the last thaw. When Father Benedict announced his discovery, strange things began to happen at the monastery. Each night, the temperature in his study fell lower than the rest of the building. The parchment turned brittle as frost, and the candle flame burned low and blue. He wrote in his journal, "Someone is walking in the corridor. I hear wet footsteps, but there are no puddles." Then one night, he vanished. The door was locked from within, but on his desk, the map lay open, the candle extinguished, covered in a thin sheet of ice. On the surface of that ice was the imprint of a hand pressed deep, and in the palm, the ink had spread outward, forming again the circular mark of the valley. Later, Scholars from the Institute examined the map under special light and discovered another layer of writing beneath the main ink, faint and nearly written in blood. The translation read, "The place where light ends and where darkness learns to remember." They believed it was a clue leading to the site where the lost crusaders had vanished. An expedition was formed, tracing the map's mountain lines to a forgotten valley between two ridges of ice. There were no signs of habitation, no trees, only towering stone pillars arranged in a circle, each carved with the twisted cross symbol the same as on the hilt of the ancient sword. At the centre stood a shattered stone slab buried under snow. Carved into its surface was the image of a kneeling woman, hands chained, eyes closed. But what terrified them were the words etched around the border. She forgave them. The ice kept its promise. When they dug beneath the slab, they found a fragment of bone, small, white as light, and cold as ice. A female archaeologist picked it up and screamed before collapsing. Later, she claimed that when she touched it, she heard a woman's voice whispering inside her head, soft yet trembling. "You cannot touch memory. For memory does not die, it only waits to be remembered." That night, as the team returned to camp, a sudden storm struck. Lightning crashed upon the stone circle, and in the flash, they saw the silhouette of a woman made of snow, standing atop the grave, her hair long, her eyes glowing pale. They fled in terror. At dawn, when the storm cleared, the figure was gone, but footprints led from the stone to the edge of the forest. The tracks did not continue. They ended mid-air, as if the figure had dissolved into the wind. The map was sealed again with the remaining relics. On the box was carved a warning. "This memory is not for those who seek to understand, for to understand is to be imprisoned." Yet none of the team returned to peace. One burned alive in a dream. Another was found wandering in a snowstorm in the middle of summer. The last woman, before disappearing, left a single note. She was not killed, she was kept, and that oath still echoes beneath the ice. To this day, the mountain people still call it by its old name, the Valley of the Death Oath. Each winter, a storm rises on the night of the dim moon, and locals say that in the wind, you can hear a woman's soft laughter, sad, gentle, as if reminding the world that memory, no matter how long it's frozen, will one day melt on its own. They say that on the final night of the war, the sky above the frozen lands held no moon, only snow falling white as ash. The knights, then known as the Order of the Frozen Oath, marched under a banner marked with a broken cross. They believed they were fulfilling God's will, destroying the last evil left in the world. But none of them understood that what they faced was not a demon, but the last being who carried the power of winter, a woman with silver hair and eyes like melting ice. She stood alone in the snow-covered field, no weapon, no armor, wearing only a dark blue cloak and holding a single dry branch. They surrounded her, swords raised, the chants of scripture echoing across the white expanse. But she did not flee. She looked at each of them, her gaze calm as if staring straight into their souls. They called her a witch, the bringer of winter, the destroyer of harvests. She answered in a voice so soft even the wind could barely carry it. "I did not bring the winter. You are the ones who woke it." Those words enraged their commander, Sir Armand. He raised his sword and ordered her to be burned alive, a cleansing for the world. A pyre was built in the middle of the field. The holy oil ignited, flames blazing against the snow. But when the fire touched her cloak, the snow began to fall harder. The wind roared, and the fire refused to spread. Every flame that reached her turned to ice, freezing mid-air, falling as blue crystals. Sir Armand stepped forward, plunged his sword into the ground, and shouted, "If you cannot be burned, then I shall freeze you forever in the name of the holy." His soldiers repeated his words, their voices uniting in a single oath that thundered through the storm. But the moment they finished speaking, the wind changed. A cold so fierce it felt like an invisible hand clenched every soul at once. The witch raised her head. Her eyes reflected the steel of hundreds of swords. She spoke slowly, clearly, each word cutting the air. "You seek immortality. Very well. You shall live forever, but you shall never be warm again." The wind stopped. The snow fell straight, each flake descending slowly like ashes. One knight screamed and then silence. They looked around and saw their own breath turning solid, frozen in the air. Their hands trembled, not from fear, but because the blood in their veins had stopped flowing. Their skin whitened, cracking like dry frost. One by one they fell, no sound, only the soft clatter of steel. When the sun rose, the field held no living souls, but their bodies did not decay. They stood frozen, locked in their final stances, eyes wide open toward the east, toward the first light of dawn. The villagers later called it the field of ice statues. But they never knew that beneath the snow, hearts still beat slow, faint, refusing to die. A century later, when explorers tried to dig into the ice, they found that the frost around the knights' bodies could not be melted, not by fire, not by chemicals. One scholar wrote that he heard the sound of metal ringing in the wind, as if swords were still striking each other. But it was not metal, it was the echo of an old oath, still whispering through centuries. Some say that if the snow falls on the same night the witch was executed, and you stand in that field and listen, you'll hear voices in the wind one side pleading for forgiveness, and another, a woman's voice whispering, "You wish to live forever, then learn to endure the winter." From then on, that land was cursed. No trees grew there, no birds crossed the sky. Travellers felt the air turn colder as they approached, and those who lingered said their skin lost all feeling as if an unseen hand was touching them. A priest once tried to perform a cleansing ritual, carrying a silver cross and holy candles, but when he lit them, the flames went out instantly. In the mist, he saw hundreds of figures kneeling in the snow, swords in hand, heads bowed low. He fled and never returned. But what few people know is that after the witch spoke her final curse, she did not vanish. When Sir Armand fell, she walked to him, placed her hand on his sword, and said, "I do not kill you. I honour your words to be frozen forever in the name of the holy. Then be holy, Armand." And she turned to ice with them, standing among the knights, eyes closed, a faint smile on her lips. People later called it the winter's offering, the merging of the one who cursed and the ones who were cursed. When the frozen field was excavated centuries later, only one body was ever found, a knight holding a rusted sword. They said it was Armand. No one ever found her. But legends claim that on every seventh winter, when the wind changes direction, amidst the snowstorm, a white figure walks across the icy field, holding a dry branch, singing. The song has no words, just a long, breath-like hum. Those who hear it say their hearts stop for a moment, not from fear, but from sudden, unbearable cold. Perhaps that is her way of reminding them, no victory comes without a price, and the price of conquering winter is never feeling warmth again. 300 years had passed since the curse was spoken, yet in that valley, winter had never truly left. Each year, the snow grew thicker, the wind sharper, and the trees died earlier than the last. The villagers had learned to live in fear they never spoke of. The field of ice statues never told the story of the fallen knights, nor dared mention the woman with silver hair. But one night, during the first cold wind of the 70th winter since the land was resettled, a watchman named Ivar was assigned to guard the northern gate. The night was so dark the torchlight couldn't pierce the fog, and the snow fell endlessly, falling like ash. Ivar pulled his cloak tight, trying to warm himself with a small flask of liquor hidden in his coat, but as he lifted it to his lips, he froze. From far away came a sound, the steady, dry, heavy rhythm of hooves, like metal striking ice. He thought perhaps someone was lost, so he stepped out from the guard post, raised his torch higher, and called out. No one answered, but the sound of hooves continued closer now, clearer. Slowly, Ivar drew his sword and planted the torch into the ground. Only then did he notice the earth beneath his feet was trembling, faintly, as if dozens of horses were approaching. The fog parted, and he saw it, a rider, fully clad in armour clear as ice, moving straight toward the village gate. The horse was no flesh and blood creature, it was made of living ice, its joints cracking softly with every step. The torchlight reflected off the rider's armour, casting a ghostly blue glow, not fire, not frost, but something caught between life and death. Behind the helmet, two faint blue flames burned where eyes should be, flickering like lamps in the wind. Ivar stood frozen. He wanted to shout for help, but his throat had turned to stone. The rider stopped just a few paces away. There was no breath, no snort of the horse, only the metallic hum of cold air trembling around them. Then, slowly, the figure raised its hand and made a gesture. Ivar didn't understand, but instinct made him kneel. In that moment, the wind shifted, and within it, a whisper, a voice, distant and thin as mist. "Night watchman, do you hear the call of the snow?" Ivar trembled, afraid to raise his head. The voice came again, clearer this time. 300 years. The oath has awakened. The gate is open. He looked up to speak, but the rider was gone. Only snow swirling through the open gate remained, and on the ground, the marks of the horse's hooves, though not round, but shaped into lines of ancient runes. They glowed faintly in the snow, fading one by one, as if blown away by the wind. That night, when Ivar reported what he saw, no one believed him. They said he was drunk. But in the morning, when the snow ceased, the village gate was sealed beneath a thick sheet of ice, clear as glass. And etched deep within it was a single line written in an ancient tongue, "The first day of the return." The elders recognized the omen at once. According to legend, when the frozen knights awakened, they would return over 3 nights each, marked by a sign. The first night, the ice horse passes the gate. The second, the swords sing in the stone tombs. And the third, the wind carries the souls home. Ivar didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fire, yet still felt cold. Though the flames burned bright, no warmth touched him. His throat was dry, his breath heavy like frost gathering in his lungs. When he looked into the brass mirror, his skin was pale, his lips blue, and from the corners of his eyes white mist drifted upward like smoke. He ran to the village priest, told him everything, and begged for an exorcism. But when the priest heard the words "burning blue eyes," his face turned white. He stood, shut the door, and whispered, "You have seen them. That means they have seen you." 3 days later, Ivar disappeared. All they found was his sword, planted in the ground outside the gate, its blade coated in frost. When the sunlight touched it, the cold spread outward, freezing the snow so deeply that it never melted the entire summer that year. Travellers later said that on many nights, they still saw a rider made of ice passing along the northern hill, moving slowly, leaving no tracks. The blue light in his eyes flared whenever he looked toward the village, then flickered out, like a candle snuffed in the wind. An old wanderer once claimed he heard them singing, not with voices, but with the sound of wind whistling through blades of steel, like a twisted hymn. Those who betrayed the light have returned in the night without fire. From then on, no one dared step outside after dark. The gate was rebuilt with wood and steel. Charms and crosses hung above it. But every 7th winter, when the first snowstorm rose, people heard the echo of hooves in the distance. And no matter how bright the fire burned, the cold crept through every crack, as if someone out there on the snow-covered road was riding slowly, patiently, on a horse made of ice, carrying the gaze of souls who had forgotten how to sleep. After the night Ivar disappeared, the valley was no longer the same. People tried to believe it was nothing more than the drunken tale of a lone man, but nature does not lie. By morning, the northern fields, once blanketed in soft white snow, had turned to a solid sheet of ice, smooth as glass, reflecting the pale light of a dim Sunday. The old pine trees, steadfast for centuries, now stood bare and black, their trunks split down the middle as if frozen from the inside out. When touched, the bark shattered like glass. The whole forest had become a graveyard of life, where even the wind carried the sound of mourning. The small stream that ran through the village, their only source of water, had stopped flowing overnight. The water froze clear to the bottom, so transparent one could see fish suspended mid-swim, their bodies arched as if still alive. The elders said they had seen this before 300 years ago, right before the nights were sealed in ice. "This is the second sign," whispered an old woman. "The ice is not just covering the land, it's spreading through time." The villagers trembled and said nothing more. But then strange things began happening in the neighbouring villages. In the east, near the abandoned monastery, people claimed that at night they could hear the sound of metal scraping within the stone walls, and every morning another section of the wall would be covered in frost. In the south, shepherds reported their flocks standing motionless for hours, eyes wide open, their wool dusted with a thin layer of frost, and when touched, their skin was as cold as stone. Everywhere these signs appeared, within days the soil turned barren, birds fled, and the people began to fall ill. They had no fever, no cough, only a coldness that no fire or blanket could drive away. They said they dreamed of armoured figures walking past their windows, eyes glowing blue, and in those dreams, a voice would whisper by their ear, "The oath has opened. Can you still keep warm?" In waking life, the wind had begun to change. In this valley, winter winds had always blown from north to south, but since Eva's disappearance, they turned the other way, carrying a dry chill that smelled of rust and ash. The villagers built altars and prayed, but no saint answered. The candles flickered weakly, then died whenever a breeze passed. A young priest sent from the south brought with him a silver cross and tried to perform an exorcism in the village square. When he planted the cross into the ground, the earth trembled and ice spread outward, swallowing it whole. He stared in horror as the frost climbed the metal, carving strange runes into its surface, the same runes as the old oath. That night, he wrote in his journal, "The ice is not a natural force. It is a living memory, a cold soul recreating itself. Wherever it passes, warmth disappears, as though the very breath of the world is being stolen." A week later, the next village vanished beneath snow. When searchers arrived, they found only rooftops encased in thick ice, windows sealed shut, no bodies inside. Across the frozen ground, long grooves stretched outward like the trail of iron boots, leading toward the northern forest. Under the moonlight, the marks shimmered faint blue and strangely. Though the wind howled, the snow never covered them. People called it the path of those without shadows. Every night the wind screamed through the valley, carrying the clang of metal. Some swore they saw ranks of ice-bound knights marching along the mountainside slowly, silently. No sound of hooves, only the faint crackle of frost grinding against itself. They did not march north or south, but circled endlessly, as if searching for something they had lost. A monk, who came to the region to offer prayers for the dead, claimed that while meditating at the edge of the ice, he heard voices in the wind. Many voices, layered over one another, all speaking the same words. "Return the fire." The phrase haunted him until his death. He believed the witch's curse was not punishment but a cycle. The knights had been stripped of warmth, doomed to wander forever, carrying the frost in search of the fire they once extinguished when they burned her. And so, wherever they walked, warmth was consumed. Each forest, each river, each human breath froze to sustain the thing that lived within them. A young hunter who once followed their trail said that when he reached the edge of the ice, he saw figures inside, not statues, but real bodies, frozen mid-movement, eyes open, mouths parted, screaming silently. When he backed away, one of the figures turned to look at him. After that night, the hunter went mad, muttering for the rest of his life, "The ice knows my name." Blizzards no longer came with the seasons, they came with the dreams of the living. There were nights without wind, without clouds, yet snow still fell and everyone knew that meant they were passing through. Generations later, geologists came to study the phenomenon. They measured and found the frost expanding each year, but not following any climate pattern. The ice spread in a spiral, as though someone were rewriting an oath in frost. When they drilled into the deepest layer, the bits snapped, and from beneath the ice came a deep, resonant sound, like the earth exhaling. One of the men whispered as he left, "It isn't the ice that's spreading, it's the memory of the cold." And so, wherever that breath reached, trees stood dead, water turned to mirrors, and the wind changed course, a final warning to anyone who dared awaken the old oath. Because when the ice begins to remember, the world will forget how to melt. Centuries later, when the ice had already devoured nearly all the northern mountains, a group of monks unearthed the ancient monastery, once belonging to the order of Ordo Glacialis, the same order forever tied to the legend of the frozen knights. The monastery lay deep within a ravine, half buried in snow, half swallowed by darkness. When they finally forced open the heavy stone doors that had been sealed for hundreds of years, a violent wave of cold burst outward, freezing one of the men where he stood, paralyzed on one side. They lit candles and descended deeper inside through long corridors lined with headless statues of saints, through faded stained glass windows until they reached an iron door engraved with the image of a chalice. Carved above it were Latin words, "Calix Hiamis," where the soul sleeps within the ice. Beyond that door, they discovered a vault. Inside were hundreds of manuscripts, each encased in blocks of crystal-clear ice. A young monk, curious, heated one block with a small alcohol lamp. The ice melted slowly, revealing a half-burned parchment bound in goatskin, dated 1216. On its first page, written in trembling brown ink, were the words, "The Confession of Knight Armand, betrayer of the oath." They brought it up, dried it carefully, and began to read. The first line silenced them all. "We did not go to fight for God. We went to reclaim the chalice of winter, the artifact forbidden since the dawn of creation." Armand wrote that he and his knights had been sent not by faith, but by command dispatched personally by a cardinal of the church, not to destroy a witch, but to retrieve an ancient relic. The monks had called it Calix Hemis. According to him, it was a chalice forged before Scripture itself, said to contain the soul of the first being who refused death. It granted eternal life, but without warmth. Whoever drank from it would live forever, but their heart would never again beat for love or faith. The church called it the chalice of sin, for it gave immortality without God. Yet instead of destroying it, they sought to possess it. Armand wrote that he had believed the mission sacred until they met the guardian the woman history would call the Winter Witch. She was not a demon, but the last of an ancient order, charged with keeping the chalice beyond the reach of men. When they killed her, she did not curse them out of vengeance, but because the oath had been broken. "You have not only killed me," she said in his account, "you have broken the seal of death. And when death is no longer sacred, winter will never end." At the end of the manuscript, Armand confessed that they found the chalice. He described it in chilling detail. A cup made of ice that never melted, with water swirling gently inside, though untouched by any hand. When he reached for it, his hand froze instantly, and a whisper filled his mind. "You have chosen to live forever," he wrote. "From that moment we did not die, but we were no longer men." Armand hid the chalice beneath the monastery, and begged to be sealed away with his brethren so no one could ever find it again. His final words read, "If the church ever finds the chalice, they will not stop until the world kneels beneath the ice." When the monks finished reading, they sat in silence for a long time. One of them turned the last page and found a pale grey handprint pressed into the parchment, as if from a damp hand. Under candlelight, they realized it was not blood but hardened wax. One monk recognized it immediately. It was the same sacred sealing wax used to bind holy relics in the Middle Ages. But the terrifying part was that it was still warm. They dug further into the vault and uncovered a stone chest, bound with silver chains. When they pried it open, there was no chalice, only an empty space covered in thin frost and a single inscription carved into the lid. "It has been given to the one who keeps the oath." After the discovery, the monks sent word to the Vatican. 1 month later, the entire monastery was sealed off, forbidden to all. A massive blizzard struck the region, swallowing entire ridgelines in snow. None of the monks survived. Years later, among the ruins, a half-burned note was found. It was written by the expedition leader, and it read, "The ice spreads not because of the cold, but because mankind keeps searching for the chalice." Since then, the chalice of winter has become a forbidden legend among scholars, but some still believe it exists, because all who dared to seek that vault vanished, and warmth vanished with them. They say that if, on a winter night, you pass through those mountains and the fog grows so thick the wind cannot move it, do not look into it. For in the white haze, you may see a faint blue glow, like light reflected from a spinning cup. And if you hear a voice whisper, "Do you wish to live forever?" run, because that is not a question. It is an invitation. According to what was written in the final pages of Armand's manuscript, the final betrayal did not happen in anger or sudden greed, but in silence, a silence so cold it made time stop. After finding the chalice of winter, the knights did not deliver it to the cardinal right away. They carried the relic with them on the journey home, and as they crossed the field, where frost first began to cling to the horses' legs, they began to dream. In those dreams, each man saw another version of himself, younger, stronger, untouched by fear of death. And in every dream, a gentle voice spoke, "If you fear losing your soul, drink from me. I will keep it for you." When they awoke, The chalice glowed faintly, as though the ice itself were breathing warmth. But that warmth did not touch their flesh, it slipped into their minds, lulling them with a false peace. Armand wrote that he felt weightless, as if standing on the edge of eternal sleep. The soldiers around him, exhausted and starving, looked at one another, said nothing. They simply nodded, and all knelt before the chalice. No one knew who drank first. Perhaps it was Sir Roland, who had lost his family in war, the man who once said he would rather freeze than watch the world burn again. When the liquid touched his lips, his eyes flew open, and a pale mist poured from his throat. He fell, trembling, then stood, but his eyes no longer held their brown hue. They burned with a quiet blue. Another drank, and another, until all had taken from it. When it was Armand's turn, he hesitated, but the whisper came again, inside his skull. "You led them here. You cannot turn back." He closed his eyes and drank. In that moment, he felt the world dissolve around him. There was no heat, no cold, no wind, only a vast emptiness stretching without end. When he opened his eyes, ice had formed all around them, and the sky held no Sunday. Everything was white, soundless. He looked at his comrades still standing, motionless, their eyes hollow. One raised his hand, but even that small gesture moved like the slow turning of a dream. Time no longer flowed. Armand wrote that he tried to count his heartbeat but heard nothing. He was not dead, but he no longer lived. "We are suspended between two worlds," he wrote. "Neither hungry nor thirsty, but never warm again." They wandered aimlessly, unaware of day or night. When snow fell, they did not feel it. But whenever the wind passed through them, they heard someone calling their names, not the living, but the echoes of their own departed souls. Soon they realized they no longer cast shadows. Their shadows had vanished the moment they drank. One night, Roland knelt in the snow and wept, but his tears froze before they touched the ground. He said to Armand, "I heard my wife's voice. She called me home, but I cannot go. I am being held." Armand had no words, because deep inside, he knew they were all sealed. Not in ice, but within their own souls. They had become immortal sentinels, no longer servants of the church, no longer men. When they returned to the monastery to surrender the chalice, the monks screamed in terror. They placed it upon the altar, but as it touched the stone, the candles went out. The floor trembled, and the statues of saints began to crack. In his journal, Armand described it, "We saw blood flow from the Virgin's statue, but the blood was cold as frost." A cardinal cried out, "You have drunk what was meant only for God. You are heretics." But Armand only smiled. "No," he answered. "We have simply become more like him. We have conquered death." The church ordered them sealed away, cursed as traitors. The knights fled to the mountains, carrying the chalice with them. On their final night, as the storm rose, Armand said, "If we cannot die, let the ice keep us. Perhaps that is God's last mercy." They made a second vow, the oath of silence. One by one, each man placed his hand on the chalice, spoke his name, and walked into the snow. When the last had gone, the wind roared so fiercely the mountain itself seemed to explode. The ice swallowed them all, leaving them frozen in kneeling prayer, and from that day the chalice was gone. Armand's manuscript ended with a trembling line, "If anyone finds this, remember, we were not punished by God, but sealed by our own desire. The chalice gave us life, but took away time. Between immortality and death, we chose wrong." When the monks finished reading, none spoke. One whispered, "The church sent them to seek salvation, but they found the silence of hell." Since then, in the snowbound lands where winter never ends, travelers sometimes see armored figures moving quietly across the horizon, not breathing, not speaking, walking endlessly toward the east, where the sun never rises. Those who glimpse them swear that time itself slows, and some say they hear the wind call their names, in a voice cold and familiar, as if their own soul were whispering, "You will live forever, but never be warm again." At the dawn of the 21st century, as the northern glaciers of Europe began to melt under the weight of climate change, an international archaeological team was sent to study the ancient ice fields, hoping to find fossils or traces of medieval life preserved beneath the frozen centuries. But what they found was something no one could have imagined. Beneath a mountain slope called Glasshaven, a region once whispered about in the legend of the Valley of the Death, Oath ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly. A perfectly circular object buried more than 40 meters deep, with a hollow space at its center. They believed it to be a chamber, perhaps man-made. After 3 weeks of drilling, the bit struck something other than rockwood. Oak, its grain still visible, untouched by decay despite centuries of entombment. When they poured hot water and cut around the edge with lasers, the ice slowly gave way, revealing a massive wooden door bound in iron, carved with twisted crosses, the emblem of the long-lost Ordo Glacialis. Around the frame, an inscription in ancient Latin read, "We knelt before the silence." The moment they opened it, a wave of air rushed out like a living storm. The temperature dropped nearly 20 degrees in minutes, their breath crystallizing into thick mist. They raised their lights and descended the frozen stairway into the depths below. The deeper they went, the darker it became, until even sound seemed to vanish. The air was dense, heavy, so still that they could hear their own heartbeats pounding inside their skulls. And then they saw it. In the vast chamber ahead, the beams of their lamps swept across hundreds of figures. Statues, no. Not statues' bodies. Human bodies, frozen mid-kneel. Each wore ancient armor, hands resting on sword hilts, heads bowed. Some were so perfectly preserved that the veins in their hands could be seen beneath the clear ice, as if they had merely paused to pray. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Moreau, approached one near the front. He placed a gloved hand against the ice and felt something. A pulse. Impossible. Ice doesn't have a pulse. But there it was, faint, rhythmic, steady, the heartbeat of something asleep. A technician switched on the thermal scanner. The data froze them in place. The temperature inside the ice was warmer than the surrounding air by nearly 2 degrees, which meant a source of living heat. "That can't be," someone whispered. "This isn't an archaeological site. It's a tomb that never finished closing." They pressed on. The chamber was circular, its icy walls carved with runes spiraling like prayers. Beneath the frozen knight's knees, a single unbroken line of text encircled them. "We do not die. We wait." Dr. Moreau ordered the team to collect samples. As they drilled a small borehole to test impurities in the ice, a thin stream of white vapor hissed out, and every monitor began to glitch. Static filled their headsets, then shifted into a faint metallic hum. Not mechanical, but organic, like distant armor grinding against armor. One researcher screamed, ripping off her headset. "They're speaking," she cried. But the others heard only the wind, thin and sharp, whistling through the cracks. They moved their lights again and saw, at the center of the circle of frozen nights, a black stone monolith. Its surface shimmered beneath the frost, etched with Latin script. When they wiped it clean, a symbol appeared, a chalice. The chalice of winter. Beneath it, an inscription read, "You are 300 seasons late." "Doctor." Moreau stepped closer, shining his light. Inside the stone, something glimmered, a fragment of ice shifting ever so slightly. "Could be crystal contraction," he muttered, but his voice trembled. Then he placed his hand on the stone. At that instant, the entire chamber roared with a deep, rolling sound. The air shook not around them, but inside them like the mountain itself was breathing. Lights flickered wildly. All around them, the frozen figures began to glow, pale blue light streaming from the seams in their armor, crawling up their limbs, their chests, their faces. Someone shouted, "They're melting!" But no, the ice wasn't melting. It was opening. Cracks spread across the surfaces like veins of lightning. Beneath, the arms began to move. From inside the ice came a rasping sound, the first exhale after centuries of silence. "Retreat!" Dr. Moreau shouted. "Cut the lights! Back up the shaft!" But the lights refused to die. The glow was everywhere, flooding the walls, bending perception. Then, from the center of the circle, a single metallic note rang out, the shivering hum of a sword being drawn. The ice split open. A figure knelt in the heart of the chamber, slowly raised its head. The frost-covered helm fell away, revealing a face ageless, expressionless, eyes burning with ghostly blue fire. Its lips parted, and from them came a voice like wind whispering through shattered glass. "Time has returned." panic erupted. They fled up the passage, sealing the door behind them, but the cold followed, seeping through every crack, spreading like veins beneath the ice into the forest beyond. Before the team could escape the valley, a sudden blizzard struck a white wall of wind that erased every trace of the dig site. 3 days later, rescuers found only fragments of equipment encased in frost. The team had vanished. In the final recording recovered from one of the cameras, Dr. Moreau's voice trembled through the static. "They are not dead, only waiting for someone to open the door. And I have opened it." Then came a deep rumble, long, low, and silence. Since that day, the region of Glasshaven has been declared off-limits. But the locals say that ever since, the ice has been creeping south, and on certain nights, when the fog hangs thick and unmoving, they see lights in the distance, a pale blue shimmer, like hundreds of eyes slowly opening in the dark. ChatGPT da noi. After the archaeological team vanished, the government froze off the entire Glasshaven region, erecting steel fences and installing thermal sensors, declaring it an Arctic environmental research zone. But those who worked there knew the truth. What they were monitoring wasn't the climate. Beneath that snow, something was breathing. In the first year, the sensors placed around the ice field recorded a strange phenomenon. On the exact night of the first full moon of winter, when the moonlight struck the center of the area, the temperature suddenly rose by 3 degrees, lasting for 20 minutes before dropping back to normal. No wind, no geological activity, no solar radiation, only warmth seeping from beneath the ice. Scientists named it the Glasshaven effect, a recurring microthermal oscillation, but none could explain its source. The second year, it happened again. This time, not only temperature, but sound. Deep below, seismic instruments picked up a rhythmic vibration. 4 slow pulses, then silence, then 4 again. Like a heartbeat. One technician joked, "Maybe the ice is keeping time with the moon." His smile faded when he reviewed the data. The pulse intensity increased every year. By the 3rd year, infrared cameras had been installed around the vault, and on that winter moon night, they captured something that froze the entire control room. On the screen, beneath the layers of ice, hundreds of faint blue lights appeared, moving slowly, like fireflies trapped in fog. At first, they drifted apart, then gathered into a circle. A young operator zoomed in, whispering, "It looks like they're kneeling." No one replied. The only sound was a phone clattering to the floor, followed by ragged breathing. When they increased the contrast, the lights connected, forming shapes. Human shapes. Figures in armor, heads bowed, hands resting on swords. Not static, not reflection, moving, alive beneath the ice. After that night, Glasshaven was classified top secret. All data confiscated. Some researchers reassigned, others simply disappeared. Still, rumors spread. Every year, under the winter moon, the ice didn't die, it stirred. A leaked recording, allegedly from Dr. Lemaire, the thermal supervisor in the 6th year, surfaced later. His voice trembled. "The ice is melting. Not from heat, but from something inside. We see steam rising, and there's sound. Like they're breathing together." Then came crashing noises, followed by the faint, echoing ring of metal that lasted for minutes. Finally, his voice whispered, "When the moon fades, they go still again. But I know. They're counting." By the 10th year, data showed the ice's melt-freeze pattern followed an exact cycle precise to the second. Every 365 days, 6 hours, and 12 minutes, a thin layer, about 2.3 centimeters, melted, then refroze. But what melted wasn't lost. It changed. The crystalline structure grew denser, as if the surface were rebuilding itself. One geologist said quietly, "It's like skin regenerating." No one dared say it aloud, but all understood. The ice was alive, and if it was alive, it could wake. One night, a group of guards on the late shift heard a cracking sound from below. Not loud, just the brittle snap of stone deep underground, but enough to make the ceiling lights sway. On the monitors, the glowing points beneath the ice were no longer still. They were moving all in the same direction. Toward the center, the temperature spiked. The screens flickered, then went dark. When power returned, the ice surface displayed circular fractures, like the print of a giant breath frozen in snow. The government ordered the base evacuated, but 2 guards stayed behind. When rescuers arrived 3 days later, they were gone. On the control chair sat 2 frozen headsets, fused to the desk. The final recording caught a few last words. One man whispering, "I can hear them calling my name," followed by another voice, distant, cold as wind. "Open the door." From then on, a pattern emerged. Each winter full moon, the wind would shift, the sky would turn a pale grey, and snow would begin to fall in spirals. The ice around Glasshaven would glow faintly from within, pulsing like a sleeping giant's breath. A physicist allowed to observe from afar wrote, "This is no longer thermal oscillation. It's a heartbeat." Even after Glasshaven was permanently sealed off, satellites continued to register anomalies the same day, the same hour, every year. Each pulse identical, as if something beneath was waiting for the exact moment to awaken. Locals began to call it the Night of the Frozen Breath, and they say that if you stand close enough, in perfect silence, you'll hear it too, the slow, echoing chime of metal striking metal beneath the ground, not breaking greeting. The sound of swords, saluting the moment of return. In recent years, as the northern ice has begun to melt, the valley of Glasshaven has drawn the curious and the fearless. They say it's beautiful in a cold way, a white desert forgotten by time, where the wind howls day and night and the sun shows itself for only a few hours. No one remembers the old restrictions anymore. They just know the area was once sealed off by the military. When the barricades were removed, people came with tents and cameras, lighting campfires and believing it to be just another frozen wasteland. But then, the stories began at first whispers, then oaths sworn by trembling voices, saying, "Glasshaven is not empty." A group of young travellers were the first to speak of what they saw. That night, they camped near the edge of the valley, a few hundred meters from the rusted gates of the old research site. As darkness fell, they laughed around the fire, filming for their vlog. But by midnight, the wind shifted. The fire suddenly flared, then died, leaving only the dull glow of embers. One of them, a girl named Elise, said she heard something faint but distinct, the sound of hooves. At first distant, echoing from the mountainside, then closer, steady, heavy, like iron striking ice. She thought another climbing group might be arriving, but when she looked out, there was only endless snow stretching into the horizon. No footprints, no movement. Yet the sound continued. Someone switched on a flashlight and swept it across the snow. For a moment, they saw streaks of pale blue light drifting through the mist, moving in lines. Not reflections, not camera glare. Shapes, human shapes. They moved slowly, their horses' hooves not touching the ground, yet the air rang with the clang of metal against metal. A young man whispered, trembling, "Do you guys hear that?" And then they all did. Not just the hooves, but voices. A chant, deep, rhythmic, resonant, hundreds of voices reciting prayers carried by the wind. The language was ancient, half lost, woven with Latin phrases they could barely recognize. Deus, veniam nobis. Lord, forgive us. The chant echoed, broke and reformed, as though rising from a cathedral buried beneath the ice. One of the boys shouted to drown it out, but the wind devoured his voice. Elise raised her camera, hands shaking, pointing it toward the sound. In the far corner of the frame, through the mist, she caught the silhouette of a rider, a figure in silver armor, eyes glowing faint blue, moving slowly toward them, leaving no trace upon the snow. Elise screamed, dropped the camera, and fled. They all rushed inside the tent, zipped it tight, clutching each other and praying. The wind stopped, utter silence. Then 3 metallic knocks on the tent's roof, sharp, even, like a sword tapping to a steady rhythm. Elise wrote later in her journal, "I didn't dare open my eyes, but I knew they were outside. I could feel their cold through the fabric, and in the wind, someone whispered beside my ear, 'Do not fear, we are praying for you.'" The next morning they left in panic. Back in the city, they sent their footage to a local news station. In the clip, the part Elise thought was blurred appeared crystal clear, far off in the fog, Dozens of icebound knights knelt in a circle, hands upon their swords, heads bowed. The campfire reflected on their armor, flickering blue like water rippling over steel. The video was deleted within hours, but not before it spread. Other groups came to see for themselves. Some found nothing, others never returned. People began calling it the Echo of Glasshaven. Acoustic researchers recorded strange frequencies in the area. By day, complete silence. But at night, around 18 hertzes below human hearing, a low pulse emerged. 4 beats, then a pause, identical to the ice rhythm data from 2 centuries before. They amplified the signal, converting it into audible sound. What they heard was a murmur of human voices, metal clashing, hooves striking ground, and sometimes a single voice speaking clearly. Tempus non curat mortuos. Time does not measure the dead. A professor of ancient languages listened to it and went pale. That's not a prayer, he said quietly. It's a rite of awakening. The valley was sealed off once more. But even behind fences, every year on the winter moon, there are still those who dare to camp near the border. One last witness, an old fisherman named Raal, told his story before he died. He said he was passing by at midnight to fish when the snow began to glow, and the wind carried the sound of hooves and voices calling in a tongue he didn't know. He hid behind a rock and saw the entire valley shining like glass, reflecting hundreds of riders on horseback, gliding through the mist. They didn't look around, didn't speak, only rode north, toward the mountains buried in ice. They were singing, he said. Not like humans, more like the sound of metal remembering itself. And when they passed, I felt the fire in my chest go out. People laughed, said the old man was lying. But when he died, they found his body cold as stone, though the hearth beside him still burned. Now, those who wander to Glasshaven under the winter moon are warned. If you hear hooves in the wind, don't look, because if you see them, they will see you. And from that moment on, with every winter that comes, you'll hear them praying in your dreams, the voices of knights who were never forgiven. After the video from Elise's group spread across the internet, all eyes turned to Glasshaven. Newspapers, television crews, and independent researchers flooded the frozen valley, bringing instruments, cameras, and seismic sensors, hoping to uncover whatever secret lay buried beneath the ancient ice. But within days, every article, image, and dataset related to Glasshaven vanished from the web. Printed newspapers that mentioned the Knights in Ice were recalled. Online posts disappeared without a trace. When a European outlet tried to republish the story, the entire newsroom received a government order banning further publication for violating scientific confidentiality agreements. The official explanation fit in a few sterile lines. The Glasshaven region is under international scientific supervision for the purpose of glacial and climate research. No one believed it. A reporter named Lucas, who had been on site, claimed that right after submitting his first report, he got a call from someone identifying themselves as a representative of the Vatican Research Council. The voice was calm but firm. What you saw in Glasshaven is not meant for the public. Let it sleep. Lucas protested, saying he only reported the truth. The voice replied, "The truth is colder than you think." The next day, his press credentials were revoked, his bank accounts frozen, and every file on his computer wiped clean. Soon after, he vanished. His family said he'd gone abroad for work, but no one ever saw him again. Around the same time, several scientists who had worked on Glasshaven quietly withdrew from the project. They signed strict non-disclosure agreements in exchange for protection and financial support from an unnamed organization. Some whispered that the Vatican had intervened. Others swore they saw military convoys with White Cross insignias heading into the mountains right before the area was sealed off again. From then on, Glasshaven was labelled a geomagnetic preservation zone, a term that sounded scientific, but no one was allowed within 30 kilometres of it. An electrified fence was erected, and civilian aircraft flying over were ordered to change course. Even public satellite maps blurred the entire valley, as if it never existed. Yet some locals still claimed that at night, a soft blue light rose from the mountains. It wasn't the aurora, it was steadier, colder, glowing from beneath the earth itself. An old monk from a nearby monastery told a local station, "They don't want people to know, because those nights were theirs." It's not a legend, it's a buried sin. His words caused a stir, but days later the monk was reported dead of a stroke. Oddly, his body was never buried at the monastery. A fellow brother said, "They took him away at night, with men in black coats marked by a twin key. That symbol, everyone knew, belonged to the Vatican." After that, no one in the region dared to mention Glasshaven again. But those who lived nearby began noticing changes. Winters came earlier. Snow grew thicker. Temperatures dropped to record lows. The media called it an extreme weather anomaly, but villagers whispered that it was a sign the ice is waking. A young journalist named Amira, who had once studied theology, secretly reopened the Vatican archives. She discovered a classified document marked Archivum Obscura 407b, referencing the Order of Knights sealed in ice, listed under Historical Event, Suppressed. A Latin note at the bottom read, Calix Hyamis, Requiescat in Gelu, the chalice of winter, let it rest in ice. Amira sent the document to a colleague, but the next day her email account was deleted. Her login credentials were revoked, and all her devices were confiscated. 2 days later, she was found by a frozen lake, eyes open, her lips caught between a smile and a grimace, still clutching her notebook. Inside was a single sentence, scrawled in trembling handwriting. I heard them praying beneath the ground. After her death, the Vatican issued one short statement. There is no verified evidence supporting the stories about Glasshaven. The area remains under geophysical study. Please allow science to proceed. But investigators noticed the wax seal on the letter didn't belong to the Department of Science. It bore the mark of the Congregatio Pro Doctrina Fide, the same office that once oversaw heresy trials in the Middle Ages. Why would that department care about a frozen valley? No one had an answer. What is known is that after that announcement, everyone who had ever spoken publicly about Glasshaven fell silent. Some retired, some disappeared, some were simply erased. And Glasshaven, it remains there, blurred on maps, denied in every official record. Yet on every winter moon, the weather stations nearby still register strange activity. Sudden rises in temperature, electromagnetic distortions, and faint murmurs carried by the wind, an ancient chant, looping endlessly. It seems that when the world chooses silence, those beneath the ice begin to speak. The last man who dared to enter the restricted zone of Glasshaven was a freelance photographer named Victor. He wasn't a journalist, nor a scientist, just a curious soul, haunted by stories left untold. For years, Victor had followed every rumor about the forbidden ice valley. Elise's blurry footage, the deleted reports, the prayers whispered in the wind. As the world began to forget, his obsession grew. If any truth lies beneath the ice, he said in an interview before leaving, I'll capture it. Some laughed. Others warned him not to risk it. He only replied, the truth, even when frozen, still reflects the light. Victor arrived in Glasshaven at the end of December, just as the winter moon was nearing full. He came alone, carrying an old mechanical camera, a frost-proof lens, and a small drone. The first day was silent. The ice stretched endlessly, the wind sighing through the valley like breath from another world. He set up camp about 3 kilometers from the center, far enough that civilian radar no longer reached. When night fell, he opened his camera, pointed the lens toward the valley, and waited. The moonlight spilled across the frozen plain, casting a pale, ghostly glow. Near midnight, the drone's feed began to glitch. In the corner of the screen, Victor saw faint streaks of light moving slowly. He zoomed in, his heart pounding. In the white haze, something was standing there. A figure, human-shaped, no face, but clearly the form of a man upright, armored, holding a sword. Victor's breath froze in the air. He grabbed his camera, leaned out of the tent, adjusted the focus. The moment the moonlight touched the figure, he pressed the shutter. Click. The dry snap echoed through the cold, and in that same instant, a strange gust swept across the camp, shaking the tent like a living thing. Victor looked down at his camera's screen. It was black. The device was still on, but nothing displayed. He tried another camera, same result. No image, no signal. When he touched the body of the camera, the metal burned his skin with cold. It had frozen solid in seconds, as if encased in invisible ice. He held it close to the heater, but the cold only spread. It felt like the lens itself was exhaling frost into the air. And then he heard it, the sound of metal, distant yet clear. The slow, heavy rhythm of armor shifting, of steps dragging through snow. His heart locked in his chest. Victor grabbed his flashlight, unzipped the tent flap, and shone the beam outside. The snow was falling harder now. Far away, in the place he had just photographed, stood a lone figure, head bowed, hand resting on a sword. The wind carried a breath of sound, faint but human, whispering up from beneath the ice. "You have seen me." Victor stumbled back, his pulse hammering. The flashlight flickered and died. Darkness swallowed everything, leaving only the hiss of wind. He tried to start the radio, but it was dead too. The batteries, the lights, all gone. Then he remembered what the locals had warned. If you see them, don't run. Bow your head. So he did. He sat still, eyes closed, holding his breath. The wind stopped. Silence thickened. Absolute. And then a voice. Deep, male, far away, yet whispering directly into his ear. "You should not have come." Victor opened his eyes. Less than 2 meters away stood a man in silver armor, dusted with snow. The iron mask was split, revealing a frozen, colorless mouth. Blue light burned softly behind hollow eyes. The knight knelt on one knee, set his sword before his chest, and spoke in a voice that sounded like it rose from within the ice itself. "He who seeks the truth must carry it with his soul." The wind howled. The blizzard hit, swallowing everything in white. Victor and his camera disappeared. When rescue teams arrived, they found his camp buried under snow. Nearby, encased in a block of ice, they discovered his old camera. Every part of it was frozen stiff, yet the film inside was intact. It took weeks to recover the image. And when the photograph was finally developed, everyone in the darkroom went silent. In the frame, kneeling in the middle of a white wasteland, was a knight, one hand on his sword, head bowed, his body glowing faintly blue. Behind him stood dozens of others, ghost-like, watching the camera. And in the corner of the image, reflected in the ice, was Victor's own face, eyes wide, rimmed with frost, as if he had become part of the picture himself. When the story spread, the photo was named The Last Exposure. But within hours, the original negative vanished from storage. Witnesses said men from the Vatican came to collect it, claiming it was for artifact preservation. Every digital copy online was deleted overnight. Those who had seen the image said they heard a sound when they looked at it. A faint metallic hum, the hiss of wind, and some swore that when they zoomed in on the snow beneath the knight's feet, they could make out a faint line of text, written in frozen blood. "We are still kneeling." After that, no one dared take photographs in Glasshaven again, because they believed that every time a lens turned toward the ice, it didn't just capture the scene, it awakened the eyes that had been waiting beneath it. After Victor's disappearance and the confiscation of The Last Exposure, Glasshaven fell silent once more. But the villagers never forgot. They said that from that year on, winter grew harsher than ever before. Snow came early, the rivers froze thicker, and on some nights, the whole village could hear the sound of horse hooves passing over their rooftops, slow, steady, never stopping. Children were forbidden to go outside after dusk. The elderly hung wooden charms over their doors, carved with flames and hearts. They called it the mark of warmth, the only thing that kept the ice knights from touching them. According to the old tales, after the order of knights was sealed away, their souls did not vanish. They only slept deep within the ice, waiting for the moment when winter reached its final, absolute cold. Then, one by one, they would awaken, each bearing a single mission, to find the warm heart, a human soul still pure enough to end their oath. But if they could not find it, the storm would spread another circle wider, making the world colder, and they would wait another century. The elders said that whenever someone vanished during a snowstorm, it was no accident. It was the choosing. A child taken, a traveller lost, never a body, only the trail of armour pressed into the snow. They believed a knight came to them, laid a hand upon their chest to see if their heart was still warm. If not, the ice would claim them. But if it was, they would disappear, carried away by the cold. That story was dismissed as superstition until the girl named Annalie returned to the village after 3 years missing. When they found her, her skin was pale as frost, her body cold as ice, yet her breathing steady. When she woke, the first thing she asked was, "Has this winter ended yet?" She said that night she'd been lost in the woods, the snow so thick she couldn't see her own path. Then, through the wind, she heard hooves. A figure in ice armor approached, leaving no footprints. As it drew closer, the mask on his face cracked, revealing eyes glowing a faint blue, like reflections of the moon. He said nothing, only placed his hand on her chest. In that instant, her heart blazed with heat, each beat so fierce that tears streamed down her face. Then he spoke, his voice like wind through broken ice. "You still carry fire?" She asked who he was. He answered, "I have knelt too long. Only your flame reminds me I once lived." Then he faded into the wind. When Annalie awoke, she lay upon the ice, yet no snow had fallen around her. From that day on, her body remained cold, but her heart burned so warm that candles flared to life when she walked by. The villagers called her the Touched One. They believed she was proof that a knight had awakened. After that, strange signs appeared. On the eastern cliff, a faint carving took shape, the figure of a kneeling man, etched deep into the ice, as if drawn by a sword. Every morning it glowed, then faded with the Sunday. Beneath the frozen stream, a small current began to flow, even though the air was -20 degrees. When people lit candles nearby, the flames burned blue. The elders said, "The ice is breathing. They are seeking the fire." Thus began the legend of the reborn knight. People believed that every 7th winter, one of them would awaken, wandering the snow in search of the one who still carried a warm heart. Those chosen were always the lonely ones, those who still believed in something sacred in a world gone cold. But none who were chosen ever returned the same. One man who survived told his story. While hunting near the valley's edge, he saw a rider clad in frozen armor. The rider stopped, reached out a hand. The man thought it a dream, but when he touched it, his body filled with the sting of 1,000 needles. The knight looked into his eyes and whispered, "Your heart is asleep." Then the man blacked out. When he awoke, his hair had turned white, though he was only 30. He was never warm again, not even beside fire. The tale spread, becoming living legend. Every winter, villagers hung red lanterns at their doors and burned scented wood to keep warmth inside. They said, "If the light goes out, it means a knight is passing by." Some dared to walk out, hoping to be chosen, believing they could end the curse. None returned. Only the marks of a sword were found, a single straight line carved deep into the ice, reaching to the earth's core, as if the vow was being rewritten. Another legend said that one day, if someone truly carried a warm heart through the winter of Glasshaven, the ice would melt and the knights would finally be freed. But the elders did not believe it. They said the world had been cold too long, no one remained warm enough to be chosen. And so, each winter, when the first snow fell, they only lit candles, looked north, and whispered, "Please, let them sleep." Yet in that still night, between the wind and the crackle of flame, those who listen carefully can hear it, the distant rhythm of metal, the soft tread of hooves on snow, and a deep voice like the breath of the wind whispering back, "The fire still burns, we will return." Tonight, as the winter wind lashes through the bare forests, when you've turned off every light and only a small candle casts its golden glow upon the wall, listen closely. You might hear a sound faint, light as a breath, yet steady, rhythmic, and distant, the sound of hooves upon the ice. Not an echo from the road, not the wind against your roof, but the weight of metal striking against time itself, slow and mournful, like the heartbeat of a world in hibernation. The elders of Glasshaven say that when the wind shifts and the snow falls upward, that is when the winter gate opens, the boundary between the living and the sealed grows thin. It is also the night when the ice knights ride out from their frozen halls, travelling along the white roads, seeking those who can still listen. They do not hunt, they do not harm. They only ride, slowly, searching for a soul willing to tell their story. Because, as the legend says, they cannot rest as long as their names are forgotten and their vows left unfinished. Many claim to have seen them. Some say they appear like mirages, smoke drifting in mist. Others swear they've touched their armor, cold and solid as real ice. But no matter the telling, all agree their eyes are sorrowful, deep and distant. Like the bottom of the sea, the gaze of those who have stared too long into eternity. Someone once dared to ask, "What do you want?" And the voice that answered was soft as frozen breath. We want nothing more than to be remembered, before we fade completely. A girl from the forest's edge once said she met them in a dream. She stood upon a field of snow, and far ahead, hundreds of knights knelt, the moonlight glinting off their armor like ripples of water. One approached, laid his sword before her, and said, "We once had names, we once had souls. But when the ice closed, they vanished. Speak of us, so that the last warmth is not devoured." She woke in tears, her hands still cold as if she had truly touched the ice. From that day on, she began to record every story, gathering fragments of legend, scattered whispers as though guided by them. Perhaps, in each of us, there is a small part of those nights, the part that knows we once swore something and have forgotten, the part that lost its faith but cannot die. Each winter, as the world sinks into silence, they return not to bring fear but to remind us that the cold is not just of snow, but of forgotten memories. That every vow once spoken in fire, no matter how buried in frost, still waits for someone to keep it. And that sometimes the last story told is the only warmth left to keep humanity from freezing. They say if you lose your way in a snowy night and hear the sound of hooves, don't run. They're not hunting you. They only want to be sure that you can hear. If you stand still, breathe deeply, and look out into the distance, you might see a faint blue shimmer upon the snow. It's not an illusion, it's the reflection of armor from centuries past. Perhaps they're standing there, silent, watching you, wondering if you still remember their tale. If you whisper back, "I hear you," the wind will soften, and the snow will fall slower. Because in that moment, they know they are not forgotten. Someone once placed a microphone at the edge of Glasshaven during a full moon night. For 3 hours, it recorded nothing. No wind, no snow, only silence. But in the final minute, there came a faint echo, like many voices speaking as one. When the sound was filtered, a Latin phrase was heard. Verba frigoris, vox memoriae. The words of ice, the voice of memory. Since then, people have believed that ice does not only preserve bodies, but also words left unsaid. And if that's true, then every winter wind is a story searching for ears to hear it. Tonight, as the wind whispers against your window, try stopping for a moment. Turn off the music, the lights, and let your room sink into darkness. You might hear something, the ring of metal, the tread of a horse, or just the wind. But maybe, among those sounds, a rough voice will murmur, "Are you listening?" If your skin grows cold but your heart feels a little warmer, don't be afraid. It's them. They've found someone willing to listen. And if you pass this story on, then tonight, they will kneel quietly within the ice for one more season. But if you stay silent, if the world forgets them once again, then, when winter comes, pay attention. Because in the brief stillness before the wind stops, amid the endless white, you'll see the figure of a knight bowing low, hand upon his sword, a blue light glinting upon the ice. Don't run. Stand still, for perhaps they have not come to take your soul, only to ask you to tell their story before it is buried in the ice forever. If you're still here, it means your heart is beating in rhythm with the stories of the night. Hit subscribe to join me on the next journey, where every shadow hides a secret waiting to be awakened. And now, dim the lights, loosen your mind, and let sleep carry you away. Sleep peacefully for tonight. The world is still whispering,